Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. And we're back with another episode of Socializing Security. Looking to have another great conversation today with a guest. This time we're going to talk to Bharat Jogi about his work as a threat research director at Qualys, which I think Milu is even more excited than I am.
I am a big Qualys fangirl, and I will say we're definitely going to have to ask them how we pronounce that properly, because I think I've always just said Qualys, but I'm very curious about the pronunciation too from their team. But yes, I have no issue like broadcasting their brand just because they are one of the tools that I wear when I'm wearing my like vendor due diligence, compliance, and security hat. I always recommend for my teams and my clients to use Qualys, specifically with a lot of their free tooling. They just have really great technology and it's easy to use, and it actually like looks great on audit reports, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really good baseline. Of course, like I know you and I will continue to talk about other sexy security tools that we can continue to explore on the podcast, but I will say I'm really excited about the conversation today too. Also just because like he's got a super cool job.
Yeah. So he kind of runs their threat research unit, which is fairly well regarded out there. There's several different companies that have threat research groups, but really looking to dig into kind of what's the day in the life of a threat researcher. Like what are they really doing to find new vulnerabilities and new threats out there?
Well, I also just think it's amazing. I think he's built most of his career at Qualys, which says a lot also about their brand. Like he's bought in. So I'm really curious to hear from his perspective also, like how does he build his team and what kind of talent does he like to bring on? And, what does one look at when you're hiring a threat researcher? And also like, what is a threat researcher?
That's basic answers, hopefully, and our basic questions with some good answers. And we'll see how it goes. If you're ready, let's bring him on.
Let's do it.
And we're back with Bharat. Bharat, thank you for joining us. If you want to real quick kind of just introduce yourself, maybe give us a couple sentences about you and let everybody kind of hear your voice.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Milu, for having me on the show. It's really a pleasure. I'll introduce myself. My name is Bharat Jogi. I'm the Senior Director of Vulnerability and Threat Research at Qualys. What I do is I head the Qualys global team of security researchers, where on a daily basis, our job is to be on top of threats, build detections, and help the customers and SIMPOSEC community, and trying to be on a daily basis, be on top of this vulnerabilities, one step ahead of the hackers and the malicious and the threat actors. That's what the goal is.
I'm so excited that you're here, and I am a huge Qualys fangirl, and I'll happily share this is one of my tips as a compliance officer, that one of the tools that your team has, you offer some really great free testing tools. And so I always make sure that throughout my security vendor reviews, one of the tools that I use is the SSL server testing, and it's just part of our standard security testing. It's a free tool. It's a really great and easy way for teams to just do a baseline test. Again, there are deeper dive analyses that they can do as part of their vendor risk management framework, but it's one that I have always had in my suite. So I'm very happy to have you all here.
Thanks for all the feedback. Obviously, yes, that is one of the most popular, widely used, and that has been there for at least over a decade, and we always keep updating it because probably a large majority of the industry uses it. And there are many more free products from Qualys that customers can try out. So thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, I'm very glad you haven't put it behind a paywall yet. So that'll be my shameless plug for the startups that I represent.
Yes.
Yeah. Having good tools out there, giving back to the community, whether it be through the free tools and or the threat research. I mean, those are all good things. And I'm a big fan of cybersecurity is a team sport, even if we work for competing companies on occasion. So really cool stuff there. So what we're really wanting to dig into this week is talking about threat research, because that is a big part of what Qualys does and provides to the community. So I guess maybe just give us kind of an intro of what threat research is, who are the people you have, the skill sets that you look for on your team, and kind of what they do day to day.
Sure. So I'll give some background. I started Qualys back in 2009. This team of researchers that we have at Qualys, I think that existed ever since Qualys came into existence. There was always a group of core researchers who wanted to do more security research, try to find new ways of identifying threats, faster way of identifying threats, helping customers and the InfoSec community in general, staying on top of those vulnerabilities and threats. Now, in order to build this research team, obviously it is a lot of work, right? And you have to be patient. You have to basically go anywhere where you can find this talent. Because ever since Qualys existed, ever since this research group existed, our core values and mission has always been to help InfoSec community and the customers, and always be ahead of the threat vectors. So it requires a lot of we need people, and we will go to find these people anywhere we can find. And I personally feel that, identifying vulnerabilities, identifying threats, it's sort of an art, right? You have to be patient. You have to find the right talent who more importantly, rather than their academic background, their social background, more important is, are they aligned with your vision? Is this person, is the researchers, what have motivates them? What have they done? Because this is not something like cybersecurity is not something you can take like a couple of courses online and, basically be ahead of everybody. That's not how it essentially works. You really need to have this passionate people, right? And more importantly, you need to give this people the freedom to basically do this creative things. You cannot put the timeline. I'll take an example. Just last year, one of the researchers on my team found a critical vulnerability in OpenSSH, an OpenSSH server. It was a remote, unauthenticated, remote code execution vulnerability. So basically an attacker can just send a malicious payload to the server, and without interaction, the attacker can gain full control of the vulnerable server. So now this is not something that, we found very quickly. The researchers on this team had reverse engineered OpenSSH, which is the most secure piece of code that is out there. And that is why it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. Like there are millions of exposed OpenSSH server, because this is one protocol which helps do any sort of management on a Linux server.
Yeah, so it's something that many companies have, right? It's like just high risk. I want to just reiterate that sometimes we have some less technical team members listen in too. So just for that of like, this could impact any company, right?
Yes. And there are millions of exposed OpenSSH server on the internet. So obviously, to find a vulnerability in OpenSSH server is like a really big deal. The last vulnerability that of this kind of was probably resurfaced like 2 decades ago.
Would this have been one that you think for like ethical hackers, this would have been like a big moneymaker potentially if they had found it through like a bug bounty program or something like that?
Yeah. And it's not just white hackers, even black hat hackers would be out there because it's a very lucrative target. And to find this kind of vulnerability, I cannot we cannot put like a timeline that, okay, here is a piece of software. I want you to find an RC, like a remote code execution in a month or so. You need to give this creative freedom to your researchers and see if they're up for that challenge. So this specific vulnerability, while it might look like it was an overnight success, but it was not. There's a lot of things that go in the background to identify this kind of vulnerability and then importantly do a responsible disclosure. I'll be very honest, like even this vulnerability, when my research team found, there was barely a handful of people even within Qualys who was aware of it. So we never share any of the information even within Qualys. So there's a lot of process that goes around, working with the vendor, and most importantly, we work with in the open source space, right?
As your team is looking at this and finding these things, like, is it digging through code? Is it just poking at it in the lab? Is it watching trace routes? Like, what's the main mechanism you use in order to find these types of things?
So we do deploy various ways, but as I said, most of the time my team's focus is identifying vulnerabilities in open source software. So the code for this are publicly available, right? So we do a whole bunch of things, deploy various mechanisms. Some of our researchers are very good at reading this source code, right? Reading through these pages and tons of thousands of lines of code and trying to find that one line maybe of code where can potentially cause a significant impact, like we discover vulnerability that way. Now, there are some researchers on my team who are good at fuzzing, where you basically throw a whole bunch of stuff at a system that is running the software and see if there is some vulnerability that we can find. But mostly, I think the success that we have had, especially for this high critical vulnerabilities, is through source code, manual source code review. We don't have a whole bunch of fancy tools to basically just point that tool to this code base and say, hey, find some vulnerabilities. We don't do that. That's not, I'm not saying that is a bad approach. That is not our approach when we look at vulnerability.
This makes me feel a lot better about the week that I've had at work, because sometimes the manual stuff, as much as like it's not the sexiest thing that we do, right? I would sometimes way rather play around with all of the cool cybersecurity tools that are available in the marketplace. And yet sometimes, unfortunately, because human error is still one of the largest risks to companies, the manual review and having excellent researchers that are doing the work and having excellent team members, whether that's IT team members or security, compliance, risk management, or again, some just threat researchers who I would love to meet, by the way. But doing those manual code reviews, as much as it's so monotonous, unfortunately, that could be the difference between a 0-day vulnerability that could take out so many companies, which we've seen all over the news in recent history. And again, hopefully, I hope your team has like a great accolades process, because like that is not the most fun job. Scanning through code manually is not fun.
Yeah, and that is where, as I said, you have to have that patience. Like, this is the qualities that we are looking when we are, trying to hire these researchers. Someone like this kind of stuff, unless you are really motivated, passionate about what you are doing, you cannot do this job. It's just not possible. The regression vulnerability that we found, it's not the first vulnerability that we found in OpenSSH. It's for last 3-4 years, on and off. At some point you give up, then you again pick it up. So the researcher working on this was spent probably last 3 years just reviewing, auditing OpenSSH source code to find these vulnerabilities. You really need to have passion to do this, otherwise you will not succeed. And that is what my goal is, to identify this talent and help them bring into Qualys, right, and give them this that they need to do this research.
I think you and I have a similar hiring strategy when it comes to also finding compliance individuals and security, just because sometimes, again, like I currently am working through like a manual quality control audit of data transfers with an IT organization. Talk about not the most fun part of your job. Yes. I speak about this very actively about access control as well. Doing access control audits is not fun. Yes. And so, like I'm curious how your team does metrics for not only for performance with your team, because if somebody's doing that work for 3 years and they don't find anything, they're still doing really good work, right? Yes. So like, how does your team do the metrics part of it?
So obviously, this, as I like to believe that, this is more of a art rather than just driven by metrics. But what we have encountered is, while we are looking at, a specific piece of open source code, etc., while we may not have found like the crown jewel that we are looking for, along the process, we would have found some low-hanging fruits, some vulnerabilities that are not as critical as we would like them to be. So overall, when we look at it, identifying vulnerability like regression, it's years of work. But during that course, you get the understanding because you're spending so much time on it. You get the understanding of what the vulnerability is, like, how the source code is written, etc. And you will find some or the other vulnerabilities, right? When and we have seen even in open source, codes get reused. The same uh, person might have contributed in various projects. So it's likely that, okay, because we found vulnerability here, we may probably be able to find similar kind of vulnerability in other software and other open source project. So yeah, it's not that, and I think, it is challenging, but over the course, you will see that, you will, like, if you look at the Qualys research that was happening probably 10 years ago versus now, we are right now at a point where we are only interested in finding this very critical vulnerabilities in this critical or so-called very secure piece of code, right? Like OpenSSH, when we found out, okay, it's a remote code, no user interaction, full compromise, that was a very big deal. But we do found other vulnerabilities in the software as well.
I'll just say that whenever the Qualys team does like an offsite or anything, if there's like an invitation for like a dinner or something, so I can meet your researchers, because I think I would be great friends with all of them.
Sure.
So one thing I want to touch back on that you mentioned before is kind of when you talk about a vulnerability that you found, and obviously that's a pretty sensitive thing because you may be revealing a 0-day out there and not wanting to make it available to the bad folks, while at the same time needing to communicate that to people internally. You actually mentioned as well that you control that internally, but also communicating that back to the people that are writing the code. And, hey, you need to go fix this vulnerability that you have here. And oh, by the way, let's go look at some of the other pieces. So these all go into kind of disclosures. And I guess maybe talk a little bit about how you ensure that you are being responsible about that. Again, contributing back to the community and letting people know about that is an important aspect of that. And I know it's always a tough balance between disclosing it too soon versus disclosing it too late, and making sure that the good guys can get in front of the bad ones.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation around, like industry there's a whole lot of, conversation in the industry about responsible disclosure. As a Qualys, we have a responsible disclosure policy. So what happens is, once we have found out the vulnerability, now we know that, okay, yes, this could be exploitable, etc. Now is a good time to reach out to the vendor or the maintainers of that open source project, right? And there's an OSS open wall where we know who the vendor of the product is, who the maintainer of the project is. So we reach out to them. Obviously, it's a secure channel, and we share information as to, what we believe that the project is vulnerable to. We give them a proof of concept to demonstrate that, and all the allied technical information that needs to be, so that the developer has enough knowledge to fix that vulnerability. And this process, while it is, might look very straightforward, honestly, it is not. And the reason for that is, there is a lot of back and forth where, developer feels differently versus the researcher who found the vulnerability. So there is quite a lot of back and forth. And,
Definitely.
Industry is also divided as what is a reasonable time that the researcher should give the vendor or the developer to fix that vulnerability. Generally, 90 days is like a de facto standard that has been, in the industry. But we have worked with developers,
Sorry, what severity is that for the 90 days? Is that obviously, am I misinterpreting what you said?
It generally is not dependent on the severity. It's just a general practice to say, hey, it is 90 days. Now, we have worked with vendors or developers of the project in past where they have fixed it in 8 days. So great for us. Sometimes it has happened that it has gone past 90 days. Generally, what we have maintained is, especially because we work with a lot with the open source vendors, we do understand these developers may have like a full-time job, right? And there are more dependencies, especially if you look at, vulnerabilities that might come up on Linux kernel, etc. There are many downstream Linux distributions that may have to backport the fix, right? So we generally don't have like a very hard deadline. Like I know some vendors, some researchers have a very hard deadline, and I'm of the opinion that putting that hard deadline, while it is good where it pushes the developer to do it, but sometimes it is just unreasonable.
This is like, I want to just ask on behalf of the like compliance security community as like one of the team members that responds to some of these 0-day vulnerabilities occasionally. If we could all agree that between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we could maybe like hold off, because for some reason, some
Yeah.
of the largest 0-day events and like vulnerability patches that have come out seem to just happen in that sweet spot when I don't really want to do a lot of work.
Yeah. I I always get scared during holiday time because I personally that major events happen during that time.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate.
It's just
Uh,
part of the job.
yeah.
An area where the attackers do like to pick, the Wednesday night of Thanksgiving, because they know that's going to be one of the lowest periods of
Yeah.
of defender attention, and therefore the easiest time for them to be able to move around quietly and not be picked up quite as easily. So yeah, that's another one of those, just like with disclosures, is really tough
Yeah.
to balance, because if they're going to try to use something like that, that's when they're going to use it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll share quickly just like a recent event that I had this week that is just like a new one that's fresh off the presses that I've seen it before for some other companies. It was just like to see an organization I work with to have it directly is like, one, great to see instant response and like asking questions work when your security training is like actually effective is like, I give like kudos all over the company. So this team member will probably be getting some type of accolade or something, whether that's just positive feedback. But we had basically a new threat that I saw come in is an invoice coming through for a risk management consultancy that is directed to like the CEO and the board level, where basically this individual is trying to just send invoices, which is a very common attack that we see very often with like finance teams being a very large target. But I thought this one was very clever because one, it looked super legitimate and it didn't immediately like raise the red flags of like for the finance team to be like, this is not right. It came in through the proper channels, so it was sent properly as well, like to the right place. And then it was addressed to this like a previous CEO who hadn't been there anymore. So like that made it seem convincing that it was like, oh, maybe this like was done before that person left. And they were doing like risk assessment and consultancy services. And it was for a large dollar amount. So that was a new one that I saw. And so luckily, again, the team that I work with like raised it properly and we were able to immediately like flag it and get it out of our system. And then I always go the extra step by I just go ahead and report it to the FCC to just like do the due diligence of that. Auditors really like that we do that extra step. I'm not sure how much it actually helps. I would hope there's something with it, but at least it makes it kind of annoying for that individual who's doing that. I hope. So we do, especially our auditors really like that we do that extra step to actually just go ahead and report it. And then we document it in our tickets through our instant response system. So that's just like a trick from the trade for me that just came up this week.
Great.
So as these things get disclosed, obviously there's a lot of them every year. I think we're in the multiple tens of thousands a year at this point of new vulnerabilities. You all at Qualys have a annual report that you provide and try to wrap up like all of these things that are going on. I know, because I've seen some of that work in other places that are very similar to that. That's a ton of work. It's a lot of tracking. It's a lot of how do you digest all of this? How do you find the patterns? How do you find the trends? But again, that's giving back to the community. There's a lot of different threat research groups that do, and they all take different angles. And it's really fascinating for someone like me who's in marketing to be able to go find different stats. And they don't always 100% agree, which makes it interesting. So I know that's something that you all have done in the past. As we record this, it's the beginning of 2025. I assume you're going to have another one of those coming up. So maybe give us a little bit of insight into what goes into those reports.
Yeah. So basically what we do with my research team, we want to share with community what we have learned. And, it's a yearly report that we do, basically giving some insights into what is the industry going through, what are the challenges that they are facing, what is based on some data that we have, what do we see where the industry is heading. So we will be publishing that sometime probably end of February, but I can give some insights. It's a report is a work in progress. I would definitely like to share it with more, with your audiences and the community in general. But what we have observed is, if you look at just 2024, there were more than 40,000 CVEs. When I say CVEs, it's a unique vulnerabilities that were just released in 2024. Now, that's it has never, like I never saw 40,000 CVs a year. That's like a
Wait, so you just said for 2024 there were 40,000 new ones that your team identified, or just
not my
in
team.
general?
In general, the unit
Okay,
of
so
what is in 2024.
this
Uh,
explains why my SLA reporting for my vulnerabilities keeps going up with newly identified ones with my security teams, and I keep being like, oh wow, there's been a lot this year.
Yeah. That's like, compared to just 2023, it's like 40% bump. And, this is a daunting task. I do agree with the analysts, etc., that are out there. It is such a humongous job, right? 40,000 unique vulnerabilities. Then probably even if you are at a small size, mid-size company, like 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, millions of assets, if you multiply them, that's like a daunting task for this researcher. I mean,
It's also
analysts.
expensive for internal security teams.
Yeah.
I've been having a lot of conversations with just resourcing of they're getting so many patch upgrades that they're having to do that developers are saying we can't get to our product features because we're spending so much time just doing security and patch management.
Yeah. And so here's the thing, right? 40,000 vulnerabilities. And then when you look at, in order to fix those vulnerabilities, it's not that, okay, to fix one vulnerability or one CVE, I'm going to have to install one patch. That's generally not the case. Now, the way things are, you may end up maybe like 100, 200 or 200 patches that you might have to apply, different patches across your fleet to remediate that one vulnerability. So I think it is a daunting task for, I'm on the research side, but I really feel, it is very painful for the guys who are working in the industry, who are responsible to, basically take this tsunami of vulnerabilities and, fix them, right?
Well, yeah, I can share some anecdotes for this. So I work with regulators very often, and I work with some sensitive data like PHI. So there's just a higher level of review, right? And on these monthly meetings where we're meeting with regulators who are doing security, they have their own government agencies that are also looking at security vulnerabilities and are making sure that all of their government contractors and consultants are also making sure that, they're not suddenly having bringing a 0-day vulnerability into a government system, right? So they're more regulated than most. So it's wonderful to see that those things exist, but also they're also seeing that they're yeah, we're trending, all of our clients are having to put in more corrective action plans, or for delays. And also just because the volume is so large right now that they're just noticing across the industry that which is really, really scary from a security perspective. All of us want to be 100% up to date on our patches, right? That's seems like an easy thing to do. And yet it's really, really difficult for companies to do well.
Very, very tough. And then when you look on the other side of things, right, while the security, like the CISOs, the SOC operations guys, the vulnerability analyst guys on the team, while they are inundated with so many vulnerabilities and so many things to fix, on the other end, attackers are now exploiting vulnerabilities faster than ever before, right? Mean time to basically, once the vulnerability is released, to the time it takes for the attacker to basically release an exploit for it, is less than a week. 6 days from what I understand. So on one side, the security operations guys are inundated with so many things. On the other side, faster exploitation of vulnerabilities. So this has created sort of a perfect storm. And, the security teams are basically, are unable to, comprehend. They are unable to get out of this mess. And then if you look at, while there are 40,000 vulnerabilities that came out in 2024, actually, when you look at it, there's less than or probably 1% of vulnerabilities that really matter. Those are the ones that are most important. Those are the ones that attackers are exploiting. And it becomes a very challenging task for the defenders from this huge pile of vulnerabilities, which vulnerability they should exactly target, right? And given that there's such a fast exploitation of vulnerabilities and limited resources that they have, the only way I believe that that defenders can succeed is if they have automations, right? When I like in my job, while I spend a lot of time on research, I get to speak to a lot of defenders, the customers, the CISOs, right? And the main soldiers who are on the ground trying to, somehow make sense out of all these vulnerabilities. And the challenges I see when I talk to them are more or less the same. Less number of resources that they have, no good visibility into, first of all, where their assets are. If you don't know where their assets are, how are you going to even defend them? No good way of prioritizing vulnerabilities. And then a very good automated way of remediating with these vulnerabilities. So these challenges remain the same no matter whoever I talk to. And I think, this is where, CISOs and the defenders would have to come together and build start leveraging tools where they can, get the visibility, see all the vulnerabilities that they have, prioritize them, and essentially, work towards, lowering the risk that they have. Because with such an high influx of vulnerabilities, etc., it is extremely hard for the defenders to, win this game, right? Defenders have to basically get it right for every single vulnerability, and the attacker on the other end, they just need to get it right just one time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like having
where-
40,000 different goals and one goalie. It's like nearly impossible.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I just want to reiterate that of where you said that specifically, like one of the key recommendations that you would recommend for companies that are even potentially building out or improving their security posture, right, is focus on automation as well as just making sure, right? And I love just the word that you were using of like defender versus attacker. I also just think like culturally within the security space, we need to be doing more work of like raising up the defenders, right? We hear a lot in the news about like cybersecurity attack and like the bad actors, right? And I don't think we hear a lot about what these wonderful researchers are doing and these defenders, right? And so like I want to hear more good news about the defenders. So maybe that's a commentary for the Qualys team.
Great point.
I'm saying I would love to hear more about the personal stories of the defenders and that type of branding, because unfortunately, like security is scary. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast. The brand of security, that's part of the reason why Brian and I started socializing security, was we wanted to make it more human and more approachable and less like scary. And so I love that term defender. I think I'm going to have to pivot to our last question, but I really could just keep listening to you and just asking all the questions because I'm really a big fan of what all you do. I would say too, just a recommendation for our listeners in the compliance and security space, keep an eye out for the Qualys annual report, because that's such a great way to inform your board and exec level slides of making the case for your budget for compliance and security. Putting those stats that Qualys is putting into these reports is such great fodder for those slides. Because sometimes it's really hard to get the budget approved, right? Security tooling is expensive. Most tooling is these days. So having that additional like research and that background, especially with a brand like Qualys, I think like that's a huge recommendation on my part. So thank you for the team that's doing that. I'm sure that's a big lift.
Makes sense. And if your viewers, audience have some ideas, like they want us to help in any way, point them in my direction.
I have lots, but we will definitely also open it up.
Yeah. And we'll feedback, maybe we'll try to include that in our report. So we do a lot of contribution, like Verizon DBR report is going to be out. But, anything that, we can learn from folks on the other side who are basically dealing with this influx, right? There is anything that we can do that might help, make their jobs
make the case for security.
Yeah.
I love it.
Definitely like to hear about that.
Okay, so I'm very curious to hear where you're going to land on this question, because I think you're going to go one way, but I'm very curious if you're going to surprise me. But so a while ago, I had a CTO tell me that he felt like the fight for privacy is dead. and that now it's only the fight for security. And we ask all of our speakers the same question just for consistency and cohesivity, but given your background in threat research and your focus on really cybersecurity, I'm very curious, do you think there is still a fight for privacy, or is it very much now a fight for security?
That's an interesting question. And I think this question is probably the most nuanced and complicated of the fight between privacy and security.
Just in a quick 2 minutes. Let me just...
Yeah, and I think we have made good advancements in both sides, right? We have good advancement in encryption on the security side, if you look at it, good advancements in the encryption, end-to-end encryption with post-quantum quantum computing will have more security. But on the other side, we have also, I believe, we have done good job on managing the privacy as well, right? There are stringent laws, GDPR, others to basically, fighting for privacy. Ever feel that, like I see them as two sides of the same coin. We cannot have one without the other. And I think we have done some good advancement in both the directions. But I think as from a research point, I would say that, where we are headed towards is that we'll have to look at privacy and security as a part of our processes, and everything would have to be built on rather than it being an afterthought, right? We always at Qualys, we say, hey, security built in. Well, I will say security and privacy built into everything that we do rather than bolted on to something, right? So
I love that.
That's my 2 cents on this.
Very well said. Very well said. I would say mine is very similar, but I would add compliance. but that's my branch. But yes, 100% agree with you. I think privacy and security, they're two functions, two teams, two missions that really can't, there would really be no need for security if there was no need for privacy, right? Like all of the work your team is doing is protecting sensitive systems, which some of them might contain very private information or confidential information. Yeah. I totally agree with your nuanced view. No, I think you had a very, very balanced and wonderful view of that question. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that was awesome. Really appreciate you joining us, Bharat. I guess final thoughts that you have, and then let everybody know how they can get a hold of you if they want to either contact you personally with more questions, or if they want to, kind of join the fight and help provide any advice or things that they'd like to see in the report that you mentioned.
Sure. So I think my email is pretty much public today.
Speaking of privacy, yes.
Anybody, if you have feedback, it's something that you would really like to see in our report. There is a lot, we have received a lot of feedback, but really anything that I can get, I promote this, all the webinars, etc. that we do, I'll push this out. So, definitely any feedback that we can receive, they can, send and direct email to me, contact me, or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. And, I'd like to thank you both. Honestly, this was a wonderful show. I had so many things. I think maybe for another episode,
You're welcome to come back. Also, careful what you wish for. Yeah. I'd love to give happy feedback from a compliance officer if it helps inform other compliance specialists and managers and team members to help them make the case for compliance and security and privacy. I'm 10,000% on board. So I love that ask. But careful what you wish for, because you might be getting too many emails.
And more importantly, as I said, I'm always in look for the right talent, right? If, it's of your podcast, your audience, anybody you feel yourself, people that they know, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. And, I would definitely like to see what you have done, if you are aligned with our mission, and I would definitely like to get you guys on board.
What an amazing offer. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm sure I'm always looking and helping team members that I know that are also as passionate about compliance, security, any of these things that we've talked about today. So I will keep that in mind also for my personal network, but as well as for our socializing security listeners, because that is a really great offer. And again, I think it ties into Qualys' mission, which is why, again, I will end with saying I'm a big fangirl, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, that was a great conversation, as we expected. What do you think, Milo?
I really just think we could have just kept talking to Bharat about his job and what he does at Qualys, especially like a lot of their like year-end reporting and all that kind of stuff. I could have just kept going and going and going. And the interest, like I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, that seems to be the theme of our podcast, which I know for you and I both, it's kind of the podcasting is cool, but talking to really cool people is totally makes the effort worthwhile. One of my favorite things was as we were talking about what he looks for in people for his team, curiosity and diversity, not the technical skills, which I'm a huge fan of. Like I can teach people how computers work. That's a knowledge everybody has to learn. Nobody's born with that information, but some people are born with higher levels of curiosity. Some people have more diverse backgrounds. Diversity is limited if you've never left the town, type of thing. So being able to hire people that have those and be like, I'll tell you what to look for when you're digging through code. I can teach you that. Is really cool to hear, because the variations of how software can be manipulated, the variations of where the holes can be, it requires a lot of ingenuitive thinking, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different thinking outside the box. And the more diverse your team is, the more curious, the more they're excited to dig in deeper, the better they're going to be. So I love that.
Yeah. What's been so cool about what we're doing here at Socializing Security is the amount of threads that I'm noticing in the themes that we're having with the conversation that we're having. And we're talking to very diverse backgrounds, people that, you know, again, 6 degrees of separation. I'm sure maybe they're connected on LinkedIn in some way.
Yeah.
Our community is small, but to hear Bharat talk about his mentorship style just reminded me of some of our early episodes that we really did, where we really brought on a CISO and we're like, how do you hire effectively? And like, what do you look for in talent? It was the same message. It was, if I can find somebody who actually gives a shit, then it's going to be great. And it's like that type of mentality of like making sure if somebody like cares what they're doing and they want to do good work and they want to do the right thing, that's what I look in talent. And so it was really refreshing to hear, also because, you know, Bharat is responsible for a large team and at a large company. So like, it was really cool to just hear that the philosophy is the same, whether you're working at one of the largest like security companies in the world or a tiny startup. Like that mentality of like, how do you find the right person to fill the seat is like, if they actually care and they're curious and they're asking questions and they want to learn. I think I speak for both of us when I say that's exactly how we learned on the job.
Yeah. Curiosity has definitely been the through line for my career. I get bored easily. And once I feel like I've attained a certain level where like I kind of know how it works and I'm ready to move on to the next thing. Like I could become more of an expert. I can know more about it, but I'd rather go learn this same levels of something else. And that's been the main driver of my career up to this point, is like, okay, cool, I figured that out. Let's go learn this other thing and move on to something else. So
yeah,
I'm a big fan of that, because that's me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it resonated with both of us, which is, again, it's awesome that we just like get to record fun conversations with cool people. So Bharat, you're welcome to join anytime. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that we would love to meet over there. But the other thing that I've noticed that I've been taking away from our conversation with Bharat at Qualys was one of the things that he talked about was the year-end report. And one of the things that I've now been talking about with some of my clients and some of my peers is they specifically talked about like, hey, 2024, we saw way more vulnerabilities than we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And that is so scary. And the reason I'll say that is scary is it's because we're seeing the threat landscape just keeps growing. And so I'm super excited to get that report. And I'll echo again what I said when we were talking with Bharat specifically, where keep an eye out for that report. I would say go ahead, subscribe to their stuff. Like they've got good security blogs, everything like that. Again, I have no issue like shamelessly plugging Qualys because like I subscribe to their stuff as a security practitioner. Like they're one of my trusted sources. So I say that as like, again, I'm happy to just like plug that because that's one of the tips I would give to my mentors and the people that I work for is find the companies that you align with and that you're like, hey, they have great content. But I would say for that annual year-end report, check it out and have your teams look at it and think about like, could we do a workshop together about being like, hey, what did that mean for our industry? Like, did we notice that our internal team members, like, was our patch management metrics, like, what one, do we have patch management metrics? Like, otherwise, like, different conversation. And probably one we should talk about on the podcast. But thinking about like, hey, how is our patch management? If we're seeing that the trend for 2024 was that it's one of the most aggressive threat landscapes we've ever seen, which security researchers have been warning us for ages that this was coming, right? Especially with generative AI, it's going to just unfortunately continue to be easier to make social engineering attacks and cyber attacks look really hard to discern.
Yeah.
So if we're seeing also like so many vulnerabilities come up with like, it's just easier to do these attacks because the technology is just better and scarier.
Yep.
Take the time to like do the workshop with your team. Use this as a mentorship and learning moment of being like, hey, can we take this report and maybe like do a little fireside chat? Like that's what I'm planning on doing with it because I just like wasn't excited to see it. And then again, I actually think I would recommend send it to your leadership and have them read it and have them ask questions. Again, like up to you, like up to them if they actually want to read it. That's like they're up to them. I'm sure they're busy. We all are. But the thing is like it also will speak volumes to like who your leaders are of like, do they care about this stuff? Because security is really important, especially in this day and age. And like it's going to just keep being more important.
100%. And that's somebody who does marketing around security products. It is a common thing for us to use statistics like that. Like every year there's more vulnerabilities. Guess what? That's not going to slow down. It's only going to speed up. So being conscious of those yourself, not relying on people like me to tell you those things.
I know, is it validating? It's so like here that you're like text speech is like, oh yeah, no, it is backed by data.
Honestly, it's kind of exhausting because I've known that and it just keeps getting worse. And I don't like living in fear mongering. So the fact that it keeps getting worse should be a part of all of our brains at this point. Like every year has been the worst year.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here, right? Is to just like help socialize security in a way that ideally most people can understand so that hopefully it does seem less scary and challenging to digest. Because also like, and everybody's like tired. Like, I don't want to do a security training. I will because I care about it and I understand why it's important. But like, it's another thing, right? And so unfortunately, like with security, like it has become work.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, a plea to all of our listeners and watchers. Let us know what you think. Let us know how we can improve. Let us know if there's things you would like to see us do or not do, or people you'd like us to talk about, or topics you'd like us to talk about. It's in our outro, but it's not necessarily something we talk about often. But info@socializingsecurity.com. We'd love to hear any feedback people have as we try to grow this thing and make it more useful to all of you. So really interested in those of you that have been listening in this first year of ours, what you have to say.
Yeah, and also just like huge shout out to the individual that introduced us to Bharat. So, you know, again, we respect people's privacy. We're trying to do our best with that. But again, we're super grateful that we're getting introduced to bigger companies. And also like, you know, we're size agnostic. We don't like, we want to talk to like the startup with 2 people, the seed company that's just an idea. And we also want to talk to the biggest companies, like, because that's how we learn together. Security is a team sport. We are all only better because unfortunately the threat landscape just keeps getting bigger.
100%. Great note to end on too. Thanks, Milo, and we'll talk to you all next time. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.